Hello, hello, hello. My name's Kyle Van Voorst with Voorst.com, and in this video, I'm going to share with you 2 reasons why sales operations might be holding your organization back, especially with your growth and with your sales team. Let's dive right in. Sales operations is one of my favorite topics because I've seen firsthand the impact of having a strong sales operations program has on an organization. You know, I've worked with over 40 different B2B software and service companies and helped them improve their sales processes. And what I can tell you is oftentimes it's not skills, it's operations that they truly struggle with. And in this video, I want to share with you 2 things that I've seen over and over and over again that really hold back the growth of B2B software and service companies. So hopefully in this video, if you don't have your operations fully figured out yet, as far as what are our deal stages, how are we managing our leads, how are we tracking and measuring the effectiveness of our team, by the end of this video, I hopefully will have convinced you that that's an area that you need to put a little bit more focus. So let's talk about the 2 things that are possibly holding you back when it comes to your growth, specifically with sales operations. And I'll share some stories from in the trenches of organizations that didn't do this well and then the consequences of that. So the first one, standardizing workflows. It blows my mind how many organizations let all of their reps do whatever they want in order to get the end result. And it comes from a good place. You want to give your employees autonomy. And what ends up happening is you say, hey, as long as you're getting the result, I don't care how you go about doing it. And sure, that makes a lot of sense on the surface, right? Logically, we can all get behind that. The problem though is you never end up understanding the best way for your organization. Now, I want to add a little context here. Sometimes what works for one rep doesn't work for another rep. And when you start scaling up your sales organization, you're going to want to understand what works best on average most of the time. Then you're going to give your sales reps some autonomy, let them do it how they want to do it. But if they don't meet your expectations, then you bring them back to your workflow. But if you don't have that workflow in the first place, how are you ever going to have a standard operating procedure that you can rely on as you're starting to scale your sales organization? So I want to strongly encourage you to think about this. And I'll tell you a quick story. So I was working with an organization that had a lot of SDRs. They had about 20 SDRs at this time. And they were struggling with getting their SDRs to book as many meetings as they wanted. This is a very common concern. So I went up to them. I said, okay, well, let's start looking at all of the data from the SDRs. And we could see their conversion was a little bit lower than where we felt that it should be. And there was a couple other things. Their conversion rate was a little bit low and their show up rate was a bit low. And what the founder was doing was focusing heavily on the conversion. So he would hire trainer after trainer after trainer to give their reps as much resources as possible to improve their skills. So then that way they can better go to market and convince people to book meetings. Well, what was happening is the reps were so overwhelmed by all of the different advice that it was almost paralysis by analysis. They couldn't really move further along. So what I said was, why don't we take a look at how you're managing these leads? Because each rep only gets 3,000 leads. That's supposed to last them a really long time. Some of those leads are recycled. Some of them aren't. So why don't we take a look at it? And I was blown away. They weren't really tracking leads well at all. They only had 2 buckets. It was open lead, just a lead that is being called right now, that's just there, and then meetings being booked. They also had disqualified, but those were the 2 primary categories that they had. And that really surprised me because we had no idea from looking at the data how many leads the reps were actively calling, how many leads they had never called before, how often are they calling these leads. Also, what if somebody says, oh, I'm interested? How often are we getting callback times from them? Like, we lose a lot of that data there. So what I did was I had them implement a system that I've been using for years for better managing leads through lead statuses. So I'll show it to you real quickly here. It's not the purpose of this video, but I want you to better understand why this is important. So you can see here, this is what we ended up implementing. We have open leads here. The rep starts an outreach. That outreach causes the lead to be moved into the working stage. So these are all leads that are actively being worked. There's calls, there's emails going out to them. Open leads are leads that are brand new to them. So by doing this, you can tell, are my reps actually working the leads or are they not? Now, what ends up happening is you're making calls and you're hopefully connecting with people. And if you're not connecting with people after, 15 times, and every company is different, I think they ended up choosing 5 times, it ends up going out to nurture. And then what you do is you nurture that with marketing, and you eventually recycle it. But if you didn't reach out to them 15 times in this example, it goes back to working. Okay, great. But what happens when you connect with them? Well, did you book a meeting? Yes? Great. That's easy. A meeting was booked. But if you didn't, was it qualified or was it not? And if it was qualified, we need to move it into a new status, lead status, that I call prospect, because this is somebody that you can connect with and has shown some type of interest in your organization. So after implementing that, it ended up working really well for the client because their reps started prioritizing their leads better. Instead of just calling all leads from top to bottom like they were before, they were now coming in the morning and saying, I'm calling my prospects first, because these are people who showed interest before in the past. I'm calling any working leads that I have, and then I'm going to call new leads to get them back into my working bucket. And it totally changed the workflow of the SDR, and they were able to add some predictability around that workflow because reps knew what they should be calling and when, which ended up over time leading to a lot better results. The second one here, and this is really important, is how sales operations gives you access to data you need to make decisions to improve your sales process or figure out where the bottlenecks are so that way you can do your best to remove them. And what happens to organizations who don't have a strong operational mindset in the beginning is they get to a point where things aren't working and they're saying to themselves, why is this not working? And they're trying a lot of things and they're just not seeing the results that they want. Maybe you've been here before, and they'll try new things, see if the results change, but there's such a delay between those, it's kind of hard to tell if it is working. Well, here's the reality. The reality is when you run into those challenges and you have not been doing a good job tracking and measuring the effectiveness of your team and your process, what ends up happening is you get to a point where you say, look, we need to collect the data and figure out where our bottleneck is. And collecting that data is going to take you 30 to 60 days. Just because you chose not to be focused on operations in the beginning, now when you actually have a problem that needs to be solved, you have to wait 30 to 60 days to solve it, sometimes longer depending on how big your team is. That is a huge problem because when you need something solved, you need it solved quickly. If you had been collecting that data the entire time, you would have everything you need to make the decision right then and there. So I can't encourage this enough. You must track as much as you can. So then that way, when it does come time to use it, you have the data. I'll give you a clear example of this. So a different organization that we were working with, they were experimenting a lot with their cold call scripts. And I was kind of curious why, because their team wasn't doing very bad. It was, they were doing fine. It wasn't where they wanted to be, but they weren't doing terrible. Usually when you do big changes, like changing the introduction or changing big parts of your script, usually it's because things really aren't working. So I asked the founder, I said, why are you guys changing the script? And she told me, I need to get more meetings, right? And they're just not being effective enough. So I decided to make a change. I asked her, how's it been going so far? And their performance completely plummeted. So I went in front of the entire team and I asked them a very, very simple question. Raise your hand if you know what percentage of the time when you say your cold call introduction before you changed it, that you would actually get into a conversation. So you said the introduction and then the person engaged in a conversation with you. Not one hand went up. I'm like, okay, what about now? Over the past week, you've tried this new cold call introduction. Share with me. How many of you know how many times you've given that introduction and how many times you've gotten into a conversation with a prospect? No hands went up. Well, why didn't it go up? Because we didn't have the data. Now that's something that you may not just normally be tracking, and that's okay, but making changes based on no data is not okay. Sometimes we have to, right? But sales isn't usually one of those times, or at least this part of the sale definitely isn't. If your team is doing okay, but not hitting the expectation that you want, but they're not doing terrible, then have them start tracking something that you want to modify and then make the modification and see if it's actually better. We do this in other parts of the organization, right? So we go ahead with marketing, we understand how our ads are performing, and we make changes based on that data. Well, with sales, sometimes we do things blindly. And in this organization, they did. and they started tracking their saying of the intro to getting into a conversation. And it was like 60% of the time. Great. Now we have some information we can actually use. Is the intro that big of a problem? In their case, no, it wasn't. They had a lot of other different issues that we had to work on, but that's just an example for you of a time when data is usually really helpful to make a decision. And if you just ignore it, you're probably focusing on the wrong thing. Alrighty, well, hopefully that was enough to convince you to really start thinking about how you are tracking and measuring your sales team. And just a quick word of advice for you is I usually recommend trying to break down that process in as small steps as possible. So I walked you through some of the lead stages. Well, let's go to the deal stages and take a look there. Do you have demo and then close won, close lost? That's probably not enough deal stages, right? You want to break it up based on the actual stages that a deal goes through. And then you want to do that all across the funnel. So that way you can analyze that data and actually make the right decision of what it's going to take in order to improve your team's performance. Hopefully you found this helpful. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you like this kind of content, and we'll talk soon.